Hey everyone, Faisal here. It is May 21st for grade 12 university, and we're going with our short story of the day, which is a girl story. Though before we talk about that, let me quickly talk about your Google Meetup, right? Which I should put that right here. It's tomorrow, right? Remember, a lot of you told me that there's some sort of biology thingamajig for you guys today. So your Google Meetup is taking place on May 22nd, which is tomorrow, at 2 p.m. Right? So make sure you're ready for that. We're going to be talking about all three stories, right? So we'll talk about happy endings. We'll talk about King of the Raft, and we'll also talk about this today's story, a girl's story. There's going to be a fourth story on Monday, right? But we're going to take a break from. There's no new story tomorrow. Anyway, so the short story of the day, girl's story, and it is up on the website. If you didn't see it, it's right here, right? I posted it as new material. Just click there, and it's got the whole story as JPEGs. So, this is another one of those postmodern stories, and I know some of you at home over there might be thinking, why does he keep giving us these weird stories? Why can't we get a normal story? Well, again, as I said when I first introduced this stuff, postmodernism is very big and very influential in university, right? This kind of story and its sort of irreverent nature is it's if you ever take an English class in the university setting, chances are you're going to run into stuff like this. So you might as well get used to the stuff, right, while you can. But let's take a look here at what this one's about. So, uh, this was sort of similar to the Margaret Atwood one, in that it's, talking about relationships and romance and everything like that. But it's different in the sense that it's sort of told in a second person kind of way. Let me just read the first paragraph here. You've wondered what it would be like to be a character in a story, to sort of slip out of your ordinary self and into some other character. Well, I'm offering you the opportunity. I've been trying to think of a heroine for this story, and frankly, it hasn't been going too well. A writer's life isn't easy, especially if, like me, he's got a tendency to sometimes drink a little bit too much. Yesterday, I went for a beer with Dennis and Ken, they're real life friends of mine, and we stayed a little longer than we should have. Then I came home and quickly mixed a drink and started drinking it so my wife would think the liquor on my breath came from the drink I was drinking and not the drinks I had had earlier. I wasn't going to tell her about those drinks. Anyway, Wayne dropped over in the evening, and I had some more drinks, and this morning my head isn't working very well. So, uh, it's a story where the guy is going to tell a story about, a girl, but instead of doing that, so he's sort of talking about himself, right? So he's saying you're the protagonist, you are going to be the star of the show, but in reality, we probably could say that he is the protagonist. And this story isn't so much about the girl, right, that he's telling a story about, rather it's more about him. Of the three stories that I've given you, King of the Raft, and the happy endings and this, right? I do think this one's kind of funny, right? I hope that as you read it, that it makes you laugh at least once, right? Because it is meant to be sort of a funny story. But, it is also doing the whole postmodernism thing. So, let's examine it in some detail here. So, the first thing he brings up as he's developing his story on the first page, right at the bottom here, is he says, for this story, I need a beautiful girl. You probably don't think you're beautiful enough, but I can fix that. I can do all kinds of retouching once I've got the basic material, and if I miss anything, Carl, he's my editor, will find it. So I'm going to make you fairly tall, about 5'8" and a quarter in your stocking feet. I'm going to give you blonde hair because long blonde hair is sexy and virtuous. Black hair can be sexy too, but it doesn't go with virtue. I've got to deal with a whole literary tradition where black-haired women are basically evil. if I were feeling better, I might be able to do it in an ironic way. Then black hair would be okay, but I don't think I'm up to it this morning. If you're going to use irony, then you've got to be really careful about tone. I could make you a redhead, but redheads have a way of turning out pixie-ish, and that would wreck my plot. So he puts a lot of emphasis into the color of this heroine's hair, right? And it should be obvious, by the way, that he's making a romance story, right? So it's either blonde versus black or red hair. So we should note that, it's sort of implicit in the story here that this woman is automatically white, right? So there's that. But he talks about blonde being virtuous and everything like that, because he's sort of trying to, in that postmodernism way, critique the way romances often end up looking. It's the whole idea of the Disney princess, right? Seen best here in the middle. I think one of those is Snow White. I don't know which one is which, if I'm being honest. But, especially back in the 90s, all of these Disney princesses would be blonde, right, women, and they would look that certain way. So that's what he's really going for here. You'll notice Disney has diversified over the years, right? And there's like some colored princesses in there and everything like that. But, they only do that because they think it would be profitable to do that. Never give Disney credit for anything. That's another story, though. Anyway, so that's what he's talking about there, right? He's looking at what will be perhaps our word of the day, cliches, right? So a cliche is when something happens over and over in a story, in many stories, in the exact same way, right? Even though all of these Disney princesses look a lot different from each other, ultimately they're about the same character, right? They're these princess girls that need to be helped by men and all of that kind of stuff, right? So that's what he's talking about here. So, like we've been talking about, postmodernism is often about coming in through the back door things, right? So you might read that and think, oh, this is so sexist, right? You might have that reaction as you're reading this and seeing how he's saying things. So you've got long blonde hair, and you're this tall, slender girl with amazingly blue eyes. Your face is narrow and your nose is straight and thin. I could have turned up your nose a little, but that would have made you cute, and I really need a beautiful girl. I'm going to put a tiny mole on your cheek. It's traditional. If you want your character to be really beautiful, there has to be some minor defect. You might be thinking, oh, come on, man, this guy's a sexist. But no, that's not what it's going for, right? Because it's postmodernism, it's all about coming through the back door. And the reason he's writing it like this is to sort of show how sexist and silly that kind of writing can be. You'll notice also that he goes after symbolism in the story, right? Usually if you listen to your English teachers, they'll tell you, well, look for the symbolism. This guy has interesting things to say about symbolism, right? He says, your name is Linda. I had to be careful. This is on page 3, by the way. I had to be careful not to give you a biblical name like Judith or Rachel. I don't want any symbolism in this story. Symbolism makes me sick, especially biblical symbolism. You always end up with some crazy moral argument that you don't believe and none of the readers believe. Then you lose control of your characters because they've got to be like the biblical characters. You've got this terrific episode you'd like to use, but you can't because Rachel or Judith or whoever wouldn't do it. I think of stories with a lot of symbolism in them as sticky, right? So he sort of attacks the idea of symbolism, which is used a lot in many stories, including King of the Raft, by the way. King of the Raft was all symbolism. He's sort of saying, well, symbolism makes it hard for you to write. But then, you'll notice in the next paragraph, here goes. Linda held the ring up towards the light. The diamond flashed rainbow colors. It was a small diamond, and reflected that it was probably a perfect symbol of her relationship with Greg. So hang on. He doesn't like symbolism. And then he has this diamond ring, which is, in a sense, which is a symbol, right? So it's kind of, again, part of perhaps what makes the story sort of amusing, right? So he says he doesn't like symbolism, but then he uses symbolism, right? So, well, what's the postmodern conclusion about that? So, the postmodernism in there is that, he's saying that symbolism is something you can't escape from in your in writing stories, right? That symbolism is so much a part of our stories where even when the author doesn't like it, right, they end up using it anyway, right? So that's another one of the things we see in this story. So that brings us to what I think is the most interesting part of the story, though, which is talk about the trouble he's going to get with feminists, right? About the story. This is on what's the page here? Page 4? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, page 3. Where he says, I'm going to get in trouble with the feminists about this story. I can see that already. I've got that river that's calm on the surface and boiling underneath, and I've got those trees that are gentle and beautiful with poisonous and dangerous undergrowth. Obviously, the girl is going to be like that, calm on the surface but passionate underneath. The feminists are going to say that I'm perpetuating stereotypes, that by giving their impression the girl is full of hidden passion, I'm encouraging rapists. That's crazy. I'm just using a literary convention. Most of the world's great books are about the conflict between reason and passion. If you take that away, what's left to write about? So, he's talking about, again, his cliche idea of a woman sitting next to the river, right, and having to just sort of sit there waiting for, well, something to happen, right? And he talks about getting in trouble with feminists. So first of all, if you don't know, the word feminism can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it's certainly like a cliche I shouldn't say cliche. It's certain something that, depending on who's saying it, it can mean different things. But the broadest definition I can think of feminism would be um, the idea that women should be able to make decisions for themselves, irrespective of what a man, i.e., husband/father, might think, and should be able to do so on a level playing field, right? So that's the idea of feminism, right? That women should have what they would call, or what anyone should call, agency, right? That they make decisions for themselves, irrespective of what a man might think, and that those decisions should be able to be made on a level playing field, meaning that men should not have advantage over women when they make those decisions, right? So that's what feminism is. And so he's saying, well, if you have this story about a woman just lying around next to a river waiting for something to happen, right? It's sort of against feminism, right? Because he's just sort of waiting for a man to come in and do something, right? So that's what he's talking about there. And it is interesting to see how this story sort of breaks down along those lines. Because you've got this character, Linda is her name, by the way, right? Or your name, based on the story. So Linda is gonna marry Greg, but she's not happy with him because he's boring, right? So she throws the ring into the river, and then this other guy comes, Greg, right? And it says here on page 4, I had to do that, you see? I'm reading from right there. I'd used up all the potential in the relationship with Greg, and the plot would have had started to flag if I hadn't introduced a new character. The man who is coming down the path is tall and athletic with wavy brown hair. He has dark brown eyes that crinkle when he smiles, and he looks kind. His skin is tanned, and as if he spends a lot of time outdoors, and he moves gracefully. He is smoking a pipe. I don't want to give too many details. I'm not absolutely sure what features women find attractive in men these days, but what I've described seems safe enough. I got all of it from stories written by women, and I assume they must know. I could have given him a chiseled jaw, but that's about as far as I'll go. So here's a guy, he comes in, and he's described in, again, that sarcastic sort of way that this author likes to use, as being this handsome man, and he steps in. So, just going to the other page here. The way this guy is portrayed and the way he works is fascinating, right? Because if you look at the center of page 5, he talks to Linda, and she asks, "Why do you bother fishing then?" Linda asked him. "Why don't you just come and sit on the riverbanks?" "It's not that easy," he told her. "A beautiful girl in a beautiful blue dress may go and sit on a riverbank any time she wants, but a man can only sit on a riverbank if he has very good reason. Because I fish, I am a man with a hobby. After a week of work, I deserve some relaxation. But if I just came and sat on the riverbank, I would be a romantic fool. People who make fun of me, people would make fun of me. They would think I was irresponsible, and before long, I would be a failure." As he spoke, he attached a lure to his line, untelescoped his fishing pole, uh, and cast his line into the water. So, the woman gets to lie on the river, relaxing and waiting around, not really anything to do. But the man who goes there has to have a reason to go there, right? So, he can't be just sitting at the riverside waiting for something to happen, right? He needs to have a hobby, right? So that's sort of what this author is getting at, right? So what we see here, again in that postmodernism way, is we're seeing that the author here is showing the differences in the way men and women get to act within these kinds of romance stories, right? The men are doing one thing and the women are doing another, right? And if you deviate from that, well, that's not really allowed. So, the story ends after a lot of the author complaining more about writing and everything like that. The story does end with these two um, kissing. Let me just take a look at the second last page here, where he says, "Now I've got to bring this to some kind of ending. You think that writers know how stories end before they write them, but that's not true. We're racked with confusion and guilt about how things are going to end. And just as you're playing the role of Linda in the story, Michael is my alter ego. He even looks a little like me, and he smokes the same kind of pipe. We all want this to end happily. If I were going to be realistic about this, I suppose I'd have to let them make love. Then, shaken with guilt and horror, Linda would go back and marry Greg, and the doctor would go back to his practice. But I'm not going to do that. In the story from which I stole the plot, Michael turned out not to be a doctor at all, but a returned soldier who had always been in love with Linda. She recognized him as they kissed because they had kissed as children, and even though they had grown up and changed, she recognized the flavor of wintergreen on his breath. That's no good. It brings in too many unexplained facts at the last minute. I'm going to end it right here at the moment of the kiss. You can do whatever you want with the rest of it, except you can't make him a returned soldier, and you can't have them love then separate forever. I've eliminated those options. In fact, I'll eliminate all options. This is where the story ends at the moment of the kiss. It goes on and on forever. While cities burn, nations fall and rise and fall, galaxies are born and die, and the universe snuffs out the stars one by one. It goes on. The story, the brush of a kiss. Right? So the story ends with them kissing, right? And doesn't give you anything more than that, right? The author sort of just stops it there and says, the rest doesn't really matter, right? We got a kiss, and, that's the end, right? So the author himself sort of gives up, right? So that's part of the, I guess, amusement of this particular story, right? Because, again, it is supposed to not be the most serious story that we've read so far. King of the Raft was much more serious. Anyway, so it is, a strange sort of story to read, but you should know that, the guy is trying to do the whole postmodernism thing, right? Where, he points out sexism by doing sexism, essentially, right? He points out he's criticizing romance stories by writing a romance story, right? So that's sort of what he's going for there. So my question of the day, and I'm going to give you guys 2 days for this because tomorrow is our seminar, right? So we'll be meeting tomorrow and we'll talk about all of these stories. But my question is, what is the story's intended message about the portrayal of women and men in stories, right? Or perhaps I should say romances. Let me put that over there. What is this author trying to say? So this is similar to the Margaret Atwood question, right? The one I asked on Tuesday, in that it's all about, well, what's the author's intent here, right? And often with postmodern stories, you're going to have to sort of look for that question. What is this author trying to say, right? Because that is postmodernism is not a straightforward strain of writing, right? And it's often finding out what the author means is what you are tasked with doing when it comes to these kinds of stories. So that'll be our question of the day. So answer it on the Google Classroom, just as you have been doing with King of the Raft and the happy endings, right? So this will be story number 3. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, right, you will go to the website and click there, right where I've got the mouse over here. Click here right over Dragos's nose to enter the Google Meetup at 2 o'clock, and we will talk about all 3 of our stories for this week, and any questions you might have, I will answer right there. Okay, so until then, thank you very much for listening, guys. There aren't any cats around, so I can't bring any cats right now, but next time there will be cats. All right, so I hope you're all having a good day, and I will see you guys next time.